New River Cave Nightmare. On January 18, 1980, 18-year-old Lori Sherbach planned a cave trip with her husband and several friends. They chose New River Cave in Giles County, Virginia, a beginner-friendly cave requiring no rope work. The group aimed to camp inside overnight and entered the cave around 7 p.m. with gear. The cave system was known for damp corridors, limestone formations, and tight passages. They traveled about 2,000 feet underground, crawling and climbing through wet, narrow tunnels. At first, the trip was uneventful, and the group moved steadily through the passageways. Eventually, they reached a narrow, slippery area informally called the blowhole. The floor was made of loose sediment and slick, slanted limestone shaped by centuries of water flow. To continue forward, Lori began climbing a wet, inclined rock section, using her limbs for support. Her boots suddenly slipped on the slick rock, and she lost balance. She fell about 4 to 5 feet straight down into a jagged rock outcrop on the cave floor. She landed pelvis first on a sharp, upward-pointing limestone formation. The impact tore through her lower abdomen and vaginal area, causing catastrophic internal injuries. A loud scream followed the fall, and she slumped forward in visible distress. Her friends reached her quickly and found her shaking, bleeding, and unable to move. When they pulled back her clothing, they saw torn vaginal tissue and heavy bleeding. The group suspected pelvic fractures and recognized that her condition was critical. Lori was rapidly entering hypovolemic shock, showing weak pulses and shallow breathing. They removed her wet clothing and placed her inside a sleeping bag to preserve heat. 2 members left the cave to seek help while others stayed to keep her conscious and warm. The cold air intensified her shivering, and she drifted in and out of awareness. By 10 p.m., word had reached the Giles County Rescue Squad, who began organizing a response. The 2 men who went for help became disoriented and couldn't retrace their path through the cave. This caused a significant delay as the rescuers had to search for the correct route independently. Teams from the VPI Grotto joined the effort, crawling through the cave's winding tunnels. Rescuers eventually located Lori, who was conscious but unresponsive and visibly hypothermic. They immediately began treatment with IV fluids and bandaging to control bleeding. Lori was carefully placed into a Stokes litter to begin the difficult extraction. The route out required navigating sharp rocks, tight spaces, and narrow crawlways. More than 25 rescuers worked in shifts to carry her out with minimal movement. At one tight section, they formed a human conveyor belt to pass the stretcher through. Despite extreme care, every bump sent sharp pain through her already damaged body. She faded in and out of consciousness, unable to speak but still responsive to pain. By 5 a.m., nearly 9 hours after the fall, Lori was brought to the surface. She was transferred immediately to an ambulance and transported to Montgomery County Hospital. Doctors treated massive blood loss, extensive internal injuries, and signs of advanced shock. Lori survived, but the incident remains one of the most severe non-fatal cave injuries ever recorded. Dogwood Springs Cave Tragedy. On the calm morning of August 19, 2007, 20-year-old Matthew Lawn woke at a campsite near Dogwood Spring, Florida. He was an experienced freediver who regularly practiced extreme snorkeling, diving deep on a single breath without scuba gear. Matthew had explored Dogwood Spring many times, gradually increasing the depth and difficulty of his dives. That morning, he quietly prepared his gear: a mask, snorkel, swimsuit, and a small headlamp attached to his mask. His girlfriend remained asleep in their tent as he left without a word to begin another dive. He reached the spring and took a long, deep breath, the kind trained freedivers use to extend their time underwater. Matthew descended into the water and entered the familiar underwater cave system below Dogwood Spring. With each kick of his fins, he moved deeper through the cave's narrow, dark tunnels, guided only by his headlamp. Though he had done similar dives before, the environment remained dangerous and unpredictable. As he advanced further, something went wrong. He either misjudged a turn or lost his bearings in the confined space. At some point, his head struck a rock, leaving a visible gash and likely causing disorientation. Dazed and losing oxygen, Matthew became trapped in a disoriented state deep inside the cave. Without an air supply or clear direction, he struggled alone in the dark as his breath hold time ran out. Back at the campsite, his girlfriend eventually awoke and noticed Matthew was gone. At first, she assumed he was on a routine dive, something he often did early in the day. But as time passed and he didn't return, her unease grew into worry. She searched the area and found his car still parked at the spring, with no sign of him nearby. Panic set in, and she contacted emergency services to report him missing. Rescue teams responded quickly and assessed the situation based on his known habits and the location. Specialized cave divers were called in to begin an underwater search of the Springs cave system. They entered the water carefully, navigating through tight spaces and low visibility conditions. Flashlights pierced the murky depths, revealing jagged rocks and narrow corridors that offered little room for movement. The team proceeded slowly and methodically, searching each section where Matthew might have gone. They attempted to make sound or visual contact contact in hopes he might still be conscious, but there was no response. Visibility dropped at points to near zero, making every move a cautious decision. Despite their training and equipment, the environment remained hazardous and mentally draining. At approximately 8:15 a.m., a diver spotted Matthew's body a few feet inside the cave entrance, partially hidden in a pile of rocks. His headlamp was still attached, and a gash on his head indicated blunt trauma from striking a rock. The location of his body suggested he had tried to exit but became disoriented or incapacitated too soon. Divers signaled the discovery and carefully retrieved his body from the cave. They brought him to the surface with steady, controlled movements, knowing the emotional impact awaiting above. His girlfriend, who had been waiting nearby, collapsed upon seeing his body, overcome with grief. Just hours earlier, they had shared a peaceful morning, now shattered by irreversible loss. Rescue personnel comforted her as she held him, unable to accept the sudden end. Matthew's death was confirmed, and his body was transferred for formal examination. Megawell Cave Horror. On Sunday, January 13, 1991, 3 cavers arrived at Megawell Cave in Jackson County, Alabama. The group included 10-year veteran John Mosey and 2 newer cavers, Linda O'Donnell and Charles Daffinger. Charles, age 26, had less than a year of experience but had already tackled difficult vertical caves. The plan was to descend the 310-foot main pit, explore the chamber below, and return before conditions worsened. The cave entrance sat in an active stream bed, and recent rains meant significant water was flowing into the pit. Despite the spray, they continued, confident in their skills and gear. John brought a 600-foot European rope purchased second-hand from Polish cavers during a trip to Mexico. The rope was rated for 4,500 pounds, but differed in construction from American static ropes. They rigged the rope using right-hand bolts to avoid direct water spray, though this created a straight pull setup, not a right-angle load. The rope ran down a 44 degrees muddy slope for 21 feet before dropping freely into the pit. About 20 feet into the drop, the rope rubbed against a sharp ledge, worn smooth with deep grooves from previous use. Beyond the ledge, the rope hung cleanly to the cavern floor. John descended first, inspecting the rigging as he moved, and vanished over the edge into the pit. Linda followed slowly, taking deliberate steps as water splashed down around her. Charles, weighing 240 pounds without gear, prepared next with added weight from wet clothes and equipment. He descended carefully, keeping his eyes on the rope and wall as water rained down. By 2 p.m., all 3 were at the bottom, standing in a massive, echo-filled cavern. The chamber was soaked. Water ran down the walls and pooled at their feet. They spent 45 minutes exploring the cave's size, features, and formations. The constant chill and water spray began to affect Linda, who started shivering from cold exposure. John decided to begin the ascent and exited the pit without incident. Linda climbed next, slower and fatigued, and emerged shaking and cold. John helped her out of the cave and sent her to the car to warm up. He returned to the pit to check on Charles, who had just begun his climb. John called down periodically, but the roar of the water made it nearly impossible to hear. After 20 minutes with no clear reply, John grew concerned and pulled gently on the rope. He felt no tension, just slack, and began pulling it up hand over hand. Roughly 40 feet in, the end of the rope came into view, cleanly severed. He froze, trying to process what he was seeing, then shouted into the pit, receiving no response. John rushed out of the cave to tell Linda, who was waiting in the car. When he said the rope snapped and Charles had fallen, she stared in shock. They drove to the road and flagged down a passing car, asking the driver to call for emergency help. Then they continued to a supply point, where they picked up 2 ropes, a sleeping bag, and John's rain suit. On the way back, Linda asked, "What if he's still alive down there?" And John stayed silent. Back at the cave, John told Linda to stay near the road and wait for rescuers. He re-entered the cave alone, carrying the new ropes, gear, and sleeping bag. At the pit's edge, he quickly re-rigged using the 308-foot rope, his hands trembling from stress and cold. The stream noise was overwhelming as he clipped in and began his descent. Water pelted him as he lowered himself into the pit, surrounded by cold and noise. At the bottom, John found Charles's body lying still, limbs twisted unnaturally. His helmet was shattered, and there was no rise or fall in his chest. John checked for a pulse, confirming what he already knew. Charles had died on impact. He wrapped the body in the sleeping bag and secured it for later recovery. John climbed back out of the pit, soaked and exhausted, passing the sharp ledge where the rope had failed. He saw worn grooves at the ledge and the frayed fibers of the failed rope still clinging to it. Rescuers had begun arriving and were briefed by John on what had occurred. The recovery operation took all night, involving rigging failures, torn equipment, and enlarged passages. By 7 a.m. the next day, they finally brought Charles's body to the surface. Lab analysis later revealed the European rope was less durable, with a thinner sheath and twisted core. The rope failed from a combination of Charles's weight, bouncing motion from the frog system, abrasion at the ledge, and possibly a falling rock.